Hey, good morning. It's Valerie Ling here, clinical psychologist. And the person in your court, or I have your corner, if you are, I have your corner, I'm in your corner. It's a bit early if you're dealing with burnout. Look, I titled this video, It's Lonely at the Top, That's Rubbish, a message to entrepreneurs. Yeah, I basically wanted to get your attention, and I'm glad I got it. Good morning, Kim. Hey there, good morning. Um, Look, it's rubbish because I want to unpack it a little bit. This idea that it's lonely at the top. I spent some time yesterday with a group of senior leaders, and I actually needed to have a really good night's sleep the night before because I was gearing up for some fiery discussion. Generally, when I've done these sorts of things, I get push. I like the push. I don't need to be rescued from the push. I think the push is great because we actually get somewhere. So it's lonely at the top. Look, this is really calling out to entrepreneurs. I've done a series on burnout. You can have a look at the post down there. There's some categories. We talked to parents. I talked to people in clergy. But one category of people we didn't get round to talking about and that we would have liked to have talked about are entrepreneurs, right? Now, if you're an entrepreneur, meaning that you have your own business, you've got, sort of a direction where you're going, but nobody pushes that direction or pays you for the direction except yourself, an entrepreneur. And I would distinguish that from a business owner, and I'll talk about that perhaps a little bit later. But if you're an entrepreneur and this provoked you, I'm going to say good. I'm really glad it does, because the difference in entrepreneurs is that you need to be provoked. You actually need to have someone poke you every now and again to get you going, okay? The reason why I thought about this thing of it's lonely at the top, it was prompted this morning by a breakfast conversation. My family asked me, what are you doing today? What's your day like? A genuine question. Love that they're interested in what I was doing. And categorically, I gave them what I was about to do. And, really, I don't really expect empathy, right? Or understanding, because what I do is not shared by anybody else except myself. Nobody can fully, truly understand what I go through. And after I got off it, I thought to myself, gosh, isn't that interesting that even my family, who probably know me the best, would have no clue what I do on a daily basis. It's lonely at the top. Then I said, rubbish. Called up myself. That's nonsense. If you keep down with that mindset, you're basically going to become the slave to other people's empathy, affirmation, validation for the work that you need to do, and you're going to stop. So let me unpack this idea of it's lonely at the top. It's a common thing that gets said. Kim, have you come across this? It's lonely at the top. People say this. I want to actually separate the concept of loneliness and isolation. Loneliness and isolation. Isolation is that part of the entrepreneur's life where we are disconnected from people who don't do the sorts of things that we do. When you roll the dice and make big decisions, when you take risks, that's kind of an isolation because sometimes we don't have people who can advise us, who can encourage us, who can be the sounding board for us, right? I don't have my glasses. Love the difference. Okay, between isolation and loneliness. Hey, Brett, good morning. Hey, love seeing your runs, by the way. Very inspiring and motivating. So isolation is that thing where you get to a point where you've gotten yourself in your career or in your leadership position where because you're right out there in the front, it can be isolating. Loneliness, however, is a human issue, right? Loneliness is a human issue of a lack of real, authentic human connection, friendships, significant relationships, intimacy, a sense that you're on the fringe of belonging. Now, I want to say to you that you can, because of the burn of being an entrepreneur, feel lonely. But you can do something about that, you see. You can do something about that. In order to be tanked up to take the kinds of risks and conflict and criticism that you will get that isolates you as an entrepreneur, you've got to meet those loneliness needs, which are human needs. And that is making the time. That's why I'm so big on the values-driven diary. Making the time in your week to meet those friends who are a witness to your life, to spend time with the family, because there's no point building a legacy and having nobody to leave it behind to. It's important to feed those connections. That's why I call it, and I say, being at the top or being an entrepreneur is not lonely, because you have a choice. You need to make the time. If you're burning out on the other end and you don't have any hours to spend to make connections, you will be lonely, regardless whether you're an entrepreneur or not. So let's park that there. Let's talk, however, about isolation. You see, one of the things that we talked about yesterday is the switch that happens when you're in senior leadership, okay? Now, there's an entrepreneurial switch as well. If you work for someone, you are an employee. If you work for your business 80%, 90% of the time as a self-employed person, you are a business owner because you are in the doing of your business. If you, however, don't work on the nuts and bolts of your business, and you're now in the grip of a vision, a bigger message that needs to get out beyond the space of your business, out to networks, out to communities, then you are an entrepreneur. It's a visionary space, and there's a lot more about the being, the dreaming, and the shifting of the mindset than there is in the doing. Now, very few will want to take on that third category. Why? Well, these are one of the things that we talked about yesterday. Because all of your scripts have to change from an employee to a business owner to an entrepreneur. First of all, you have to take risks. Look, I am a Nana type driver. I do not take risks on the road. I would prefer to not take those sorts of risks. But as an entrepreneur, I'm much willing to roll the dice. You see, when I'm sitting in my car, I think about the family that I need to go back to. I think about the other families that people are going back to, and I prefer not to take risks and drive safely. But when I think about my vision of burnout, and I think about the people that are falling off the cliff, then I say, I'm going to take some risks. And when you take those sorts of risks, right, you are basically serving a greater purpose. And that's where grit comes in. If you believe that you are serving a greater purpose, you are more likely to go the distance. And so the entrepreneurial identity or mindset must be comfortable with risk. You have to see that the risk is worth it, because if you don't take the risk, the message stops. So that's the first thing I want to say. It's isolating because you move into a space where other people are kind of looking at you and saying, well, that's a bit dumb or that's a bit risky. And you're like, yeah, full on, love it. Yeah, not very many people get to that stage. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that you're probably doing things that other people have never done before, right? Because if they did it before, then you probably wouldn't have to be entrepreneurial. You'd just like go back to doing what you would do every day. Now, because other people have not done what you've done before, it is going to be inherent with mistakes, redos. And one of the phrases that I love saying to myself is, only just starting. Only just starting. This could be the draft version of something completely game-changing in a couple of years' time. So mistakes are going to be part and parcel of the journey, and you're going to embrace it. You're going to wake up thinking to yourself, what mistake can I make today? Because you know what? It's going to clarify some stuff for 50,000 people 10 years down the line. That's the entrepreneurial space. Look, I can keep going. But I wanted to just clarify that in that space, 100% it's going to be isolating. 100%. Because who else thinks this way? Who else would be called in by a video like this when I say loneliness is rubbish? I'll call it entrepreneur. Other entrepreneurs, right? If you're not feeling fired up by this, then I would ask you to really sort of contemplate that entrepreneurial personality, because entrepreneurs love this stuff. To isolation, this is what I say. You can't do it on your own. You will not have enough mental grit or relational capital to do it on your own. This is where I think of my good friend Tess Crawley, look her up on Facebook, and I think of my good friend Gerda Muller, who is a private practice coach. You can't do it by yourself. You need to have some kind of number one, someone who's going to hold you accountable and ask those tough questions. Number two, some kind of confidant that's going to be like your sounding board, but please choose your sounding board wisely. It's not everybody. You want someone who understands the entrepreneurial journey, maybe is a couple of steps ahead of you even. And number three, you want to link up with like-minded people who have this kind of thinking. People who actually roll the dice on risk when it comes to vision, right? Surround yourself with them. And fourthly, I would say this, clarify the vision. You don't want to, as an entrepreneur, you don't want to become a slave to the details, a slave to the problems, a slave to the expectations, a slave to the fear of failure. You don't want to become that. You don't want to be a slave to that. You want to be a slave to your vision. You want to be a servant to the purpose that you're giving. You want to be a servant to what you're going to leave behind. And you need other people who can share that with you. Alrighty, it's time for me to go. Flame on, be the change.